So I'm here today with Scott Myslinski. He's from the Carnivore cast. He interviewed me a few weeks back. And yeah, we shared some great ideas about training. I wanted to know a bit more about Scott himself. He's got over 12,000 subscribers on YouTube. So, tremendous following, especially for someone that does this just on the side sort of thing. So I find that amazing. He interviews people like myself and other carnivores about various different topics surrounding human nutrition, performance. Perhaps you might say he's a bit of an encyclopedia on carnivore and dieting at this sort of point. So yeah, how you doing, Scott?
I'm wonderful. And yeah, thank you for the kind words, Jonathan. It's an honor to be here. And yeah, really appreciate you coming on my show. The episode was a hit, and happy to be interviewed by you as well.
Brilliant. So we'll get straight into it. Where are you at with your current diet? So what food are you eating? Are you trying anything new at the moment, or have you just gone to a baseline sort of carnivore diet?
Yeah, so I followed a strict carnivore diet from fall of 2016 to the end of 2019. So 3 years. And during that time, I ate 100% carnivore, very little, if any, dairy. Organs came in the last year and a half. But I was eating just meat. 99% of my diet was beef, and some eggs, but definitely not as much eggs as you. I find I didn't tolerate them as well. And towards the end of it, I was finding that I was having a lot of so a lot of things improved for me on the carnivore diet. I'll say that, coming from originally kind of standard American diet to being an athlete in college and eating mostly whatever I wanted, but with an emphasis on protein. And I had a lot of digestive issues. Some of it was from taking NSAIDs, like Aleve or Naproxen, for some of the back pain I had while rowing. And coming out of college, I wanted to find a way to get healthier, maintain my body composition or improve it while not rowing anymore and working 90 to 100 hours a week in a very high stress traveling job as a management consultant. And so I slowly evolved from standard American diet, high protein, kind of athletic type diet to around that time when I graduated, 2014, paleo and primal diets were very popular, Mark Sisson. And then I sort of fell in with a gentleman named Sam Feltham over in the UK, who now runs the public health collaboration, which is sort of oriented around trying to get better nutritional guidelines and bring low carb and evidence-based nutrition to the UK food guidelines, along with folks like Zoe Harcum. And so I followed that kind of diet, which was essentially a keto diet before keto was very popular, but with less of an emphasis on certain macronutrients and ratios and more of an emphasis on eating a lot of fatty protein sources, some nuts, and keeping carbohydrates very low. And I did very well on that. I continued to improve, better energy, better recovery from workouts. And then around 2016, I found Sean Baker was just starting his experiments in carnivore when he was actually only on Twitter. And he was doing some weird things like eating 24 eggs a day and all these strange shakes. And around the same time, I heard Amber O'Hearn on the Two Keto Dudes podcast, one of the few podcasts in keto at the time. And she was talking about how vegetables, a lot of the same research that supported vegetables as healthy and beneficial was very similar to the research that vilified red meat and cholesterol. And, we knew that research was bad, this epidemiological research. And hearing her perspective on how that's a lot of the same research that says plants are healthy, just looking at populations of people, generally those who eat more plants, more vegetables tend to be healthier. But there's a lot of bias in that research, as we know, that those are also the people who drink less, wear seatbelts, don't smoke, etc. And so there is some bias in there, and some noise around what is actually causing the better health outcomes. And then she also pointed out a lot of interesting research on how plant toxins, neurotoxins, phytotoxins, excuse me, can be detrimental, such as oxalates and phthalates. And so I thought that was really interesting. And, I was already eating a pretty meat heavy keto diet. Like I said, I wasn't watching my protein. And so I basically said, what would happen if I just cut out some of these things like almond flour and avocados and nuts, and just eat as much meat as I want? It sounded very appealing. So I started then, and I would say I did a very poorly formulated version of the carnivore diet. I made a lot of mistakes. There wasn't a lot of great information out there that there is today, but I still had amazing results on that. My recovery improved, my sleep, my digestion, my energy. I eventually found I didn't need caffeine at all. I could cut out coffee because I just had so much more energy on a carnivore diet. And even despite the mistakes I was making, I was still seeing those health improvements. And then as I learned more, and I found out how I could adjust meal timing and incorporate more organ meats and be more careful with my fat sources and how I cook my food, I continued to see better and better results on a carnivore diet. I'd say it improved pretty linearly over those 3 years. And I also started the podcast around then in 2018. And towards the end of it, I was starting to find, despite working with experts like Judy from Nutrition with Judy on my digestion and taking digestive enzymes, I was getting to a point where I couldn't maintain my weight of, around then was about 160 pounds. I'm about 225 pounds now, but I couldn't maintain my weight just eating carnivore foods. I would find that consistently, and I played a lot with macro ratios. If I went above 150 grams of fat a day, I would encounter pretty severe digestive issues. And it wouldn't happen during the day or during my meals. It was more so in the middle of the night, very far away from my meals at like 3 a.m. I would just get very intense gas and bloating and belching. And that was very painful. And so even if I felt better doing a slightly higher fat approach, eventually that would catch up with me. It usually took about 2 weeks of eating above 150 grams of fat a day. And so I was at a point where I needed about 4,000 calories to maintain my weight. And, I'm an active guy, I walk a lot. And so that's, if you're eating less than 150 grams of fat a day, that means you need to get about 2,500, 2,000 calories just from protein, which can have some detrimental effects. It made me have to pee a lot. A lot of protein can increase nitrogen balance, which can make you have to urinate. And then I was hot all the time. And my workouts were stellar still. I think I got very good at regulating gluconeogenesis to meet my needs of even very intense, long weight training sessions. But it just, these digestive problems were plaguing me. And so I started consulting with some more experts in the space. And they suggested I test out slowly reintroducing some carbohydrate sources. So I started very selectively with just having a banana at night. And then I tried some honey, and I tried this kind of food reintroduction system of following the Whole30 diet, where you test one food, one serving of it for 3 days, and then you go back to baseline and you note, how did it make you feel? How did it affect your digestion? How was your energy? How's your, excuse me, satiety? And so I did that very slow food reintroduction protocol. And I found I was able to tolerate some of those foods much better than before I had done carnivore. And I was also able to find which foods worked really well for me. So, cruciferous vegetables didn't work very well, but I slowly accumulated some carb sources that did work well, and especially ones that are low in some of these phytotoxins, such as, plain white rice, or rice flour. And now my goals are very different. My goals now are trying to build as much muscle as possible. I'm kind of in this bodybuilding phase, and I've been basically bulking for the last 4 years without any time in a calorie deficit. And my weight has slowly gotten up now to about 225 pounds. And so now the base of my diet is still animal foods. I have animal protein sources at every meal, but I'm also able to supplement it, given my goals, with large amounts of white rice or just white rice flour mixed with hot water, which is pretty similar to cream of rice, but without a lot of the additives like folate or iron enrichment that they add to that. And so that has worked well for me. I think, pretty soon I'm going to be done with this bodybuilding thing. I'm kind of sick of it. But I'll probably start a cut next year. And then I see myself returning to a diet that will primarily be carnivore, or possibly carnivore and some fruit sources. But that's kind of how it's evolved for me. And I always say carnivore is not black or white. It's a spectrum, and what's worked for me, given my goals, is very different than what will work for a lot of people. And I think there are many people who will thrive and be able to meet all of their goals strictly eating animal foods. And that's still the baseline diet I advocate for everyone. And the podcast has never been about, what is Scott eating today? It is about the guests. It is about researchers. It is about individuals who have overcome chronic conditions, experts like yourself. And so, yeah, that's kind of how it's changed for me over time. But I'm still very heavily supportive of, and my entire podcast is about the carnivore diet.
Yeah, I mean that's fair enough. I mean, people are probably going to comment this video and saying, he's a carnivore cast, but he eats fruit and he has flour and rice flour and all that sort of thing. But
Yeah,
you gotta take it into context. I mean, this
yeah,
this gentleman's tried a lot of different things.
yeah,
It might have been that he's tried everything, and this is just what he has to do.
yeah,
There's certain genetics we each have, which mean we need different foods in different quantities. The egg thing didn't work out for him too well. For me, it worked brilliant. So
yeah,
there's our own unique differences here. So that's a great point you've made it put across, and you've really outlined your journey really well. That actually
yeah.
eliminates a lot of my questions. I do have one next question, perhaps two. Um,
Sure.
from all the people that you've interviewed over the last, say, 4 years roughly, what would you summarize as 3 key points from those interviews as a whole?
Yeah, so I'd say the number one is like carnivore is not black or white, as I said, and then building on that, the value of self-experimentation, even if that's strictly within a carnivore model or slightly outside of it. I think so many people, and I did this for the longest time, are trying to find the magic bullet or find their favorite expert, whether that's yourself or Paul Saladino or Dr. Anthony Chaffee or whomever, John Baker, and say, what do they eat? And how do they think about organs? How do they follow? What macronutrients do they follow? And just trying to copy what they do. And if you look at successful carnivores, even people who are 100% strictly carnivore, Sean Baker's diet necessarily has to be different than Michaela Peterson's or, many others in the space who have found success. And I don't think there's one right answer. And I think the only way to find that is to start with a baseline diet that works for you, and then slowly try things and try to be as objective and honest with yourself as possible. So if that's trying a slightly higher fat approach for a couple weeks, I'd say a month is a good test period, and see how you feel, and try to be objective with it too. Try to say, and try to get out some of the noise. So some people think they feel much better on a higher fat approach just because they're taking in more calories. Or some people may say, oh, I'm losing so much more weight on a higher fat approach, but it's actually because they're eating less. And so I think trying to keep as many variables constant as possible and then test one thing at a time, test different foods like we talked about. And maybe you don't need 4 weeks to test a new food, but at least a couple, I would say, and then see how you feel with and without it. Or try different meal timings. There's a big push, or there has been in the past with the carnivore community, to say, more fasting is better, fewer meals is better, OMAD is the best way. But a lot of people thrive doing 4 meals a day, or and sometimes that's a matter of digestion, being able to tolerate a certain amount of food at a given time. There's a lot of different ways you can experiment. I think the value in self-experimentation is finding those answers for yourself, and finding what really works well for you. And until I started to do that, both within the carnivore diet and now slightly outside of it, I was bouncing between experts and kind of just trying to find the magic bullet. And you see the same thing in fitness, people bouncing between training programs and training styles. And I think it can be frustrating because you want to find the right answer right away, but by eventually going through that education process, you're able to find the best approach for yourself, and you're also able to get in much better tune with your own body and your own signals, to really understand what works well for you.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, great minds think alike is an expression that comes to mind. Harry Sopanos, a friend over in Australia, he's got a great YouTube channel, around about 3,000 following roughly. He's so underrated, and he thinks exactly the same as you in that sort of regard. So he thinks, don't sort of do the lion diet, don't go straight into these things. Test things, change one thing, look at your metrics, your subjective and objective measures, what's happening, good or bad, yes or no. I tried the high fat thing myself for about a month. What did I notice? My body composition got worse, but I had positives all round other than that one point. So,
Yeah,
that's where being subjective about your goals has come into play. So for you, you want to gain a bit of muscle, you're near enough your end of your bodybuilding career, trying to finish up your bulk sort of thing. So your goals are going to be tailored in a certain way to produce that result. So it means if you need to do this, you're doing just that. So yeah, listen to your body is a great point. I love that. On the topic as well of bodybuilding, you do resistance training, you're trying to bulk up now for about 4 years, doing different things. What is your current workout split? And what do you focus on when training for maximal muscle growth?
Yeah, so I've bounced between a few different workout splits. One has been kind of a push-pull legs alternating split. And then currently I'm doing an upper-lower split. I personally find that upper lower can be kind of taxing in terms of like your workouts just feel so exhausting, all the things you're trying to hit. But I enjoy it because it allows me to split up my volume, and sometimes when I'm just doing push-pull legs, workout splits I think of as often just a way to balance out your volume over a certain period of time. So on one extreme, if you're doing a body part split where you just do back and then chest and then shoulders and then quads and then hamstrings, all of your volume is in a single day. And the problem with that is towards the end of the workout, the quality of that work starts to diminish. Anyone who's tried to do one chest exercise and then another, you're not as strong on the second chest exercise as if you did it fresh. So the thing I like about upper lower is being able to hit my upper body 3 times a week and come into those sessions feeling fairly fresh, doing chest 3 times, which is really a focus area for me, my chest. And so that's one thing I really like. And then what am I focused on? I think what I like to focus on in training is trying to do the least to get a good stimulus. So I think I'm just like genetically predisposed to injuries. I've had so many injuries over the last 4 years, even though I train very slow and controlled and am very focused on stimulating the muscle and not trying to throw weight around. I focus very heavily on my technique, and I think I still get these injuries. So for me, it's about trying to I'm not trying to be the strongest person in the gym, because I think strength is really overrated. Strength just means you have to use more weight to get the same result if your goal is your body composition. And so I'm always trying to find ways to stimulate the muscle without subjecting my body and my joints to more weight. So I lift with a very full range of motion. I lift slow and controlled. I pause usually in the hardest part of the range of motion. So a squat, I'm pausing at the bottom, and I'm really trying to stimulate and not annihilate my muscles. So there are times when I train to failure, but I also use that sparingly. So I'm trying to get the most out of the least in terms of my intensity, my volume, the weight I use, to just keep stimulating the muscle without putting myself in either a injury or recovery hole.
Yeah, I completely get that. Someone who's was chronically overtraining in my previous sort of bodybuilding years, I can say, yeah, you hit a point that everything starts to go downhill, and so you've got to try and use the minimal effective dose in terms of exercise to get the maximal response. Yeah. And Scott's been training for a long time now, so he knows what that is. That's gonna be different for everyone else. Sure. So that's why I find it difficult to outline a training plan for someone if they're what did you do before and how did that make you feel? There's a million questions I need to ask you before doing that. Otherwise you're just spitballing.
Yeah, it's very individual.
Yeah, so how would you say training has changed at all between doing your diet now and say doing it 5, 6, 7 years ago?
I would say there's so I could lift and recover and gain muscle and strength very well on a carnivore diet. So it's hard to say how much that has improved doing my current diet. I'd say the only thing is, digestion wise, I'm able to get more food in. So that's allowed me to grow and put on more and more size. So that has helped. I would say, if my goal weren't strictly to get bigger or gain muscle, I wouldn't be following this approach. And I don't think I will in the future, once I finally finish up this bulk and then cut down. I'd say what else has changed is in line with trying to, fine tune my diet. I've focused a lot on other variables, on my stress, on my sleep. And I think those things have massive benefits to how well you can train, how well you can recover, the results you get from the same amount of training, and so that has had a massive influence. I'd say possibly even more so than changing from a strict carnivore diet to a carnivore diet with some selective carbs, which I'm doing now. So I'd say that has allowed me to progress my training in a very smart way. And so I'd say those recovery variables and optimizing some of those things are really underrated. And that took a lot of work for me to improve, and still a struggle to, get good sleep and things like that.
Yeah, that's cool. A lot of people don't talk about that sort of thing. So everyone sort of says, oh, you do the carnivore diet, you change your macros, protein, fat, whatever. This happens. It's everything around the diet that gets better. You become more aware of things. You're more in tune with your body, because you become more analytical. As in, a lot of people that follow the carnivore diet are almost like biohackers. Like yourself, you want to optimize everything, but the minimum amount of effort into getting that, and that's completely normal. That's the same as myself. I want to achieve everything I want to achieve, and there's different things around the diet, other than the diet itself, that will improve it. Recovery does seem to be a key thing, and it sounds like a very sort of cliche thing, like sleep well and have your vitamins sort of thing for your food, but there's a lot more to it than that. When you get to an advanced training age, you'll find that recovery is the bottleneck of training. You'll find this quite interesting, actually. So I spoke with Dr. Scott Stevenson the other day.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
He's a great guy. I'm surprised more people don't know who he is. But he has these ideas around training intensifiers.
Mm,
He does something called cluster sets, I believe it's called.
yep.
So I that's pretty much the methodology that I like to use in terms of intensifiers. What
Yep.
ones do you like to use, and when would you find each one more beneficial?
Yeah, so I use any type of intensity techniques very selectively. Like I said, I'm trying to get the most at the least, and not just volume, but also intensity. So I'm trying to not use intensity when I don't have to. So the way I think about it is very simple. As long as in a given workout, I feel the muscle is disrupted and pumped and stimulated, I don't feel like I have to do more. So a great example would be, and this can apply to a broad range of audiences, but let's say you're training a muscle you haven't really trained before. So something I've been trying to add a little bit more of is training my erectors, which really people think of as just your low back, but they actually run up your back, and they're a huge muscle. And I've always done different pulling exercises, rows, pull-ups, pull-downs, etc. And those indirectly train them somewhat. And also doing any form of deadlifting, Romanian deadlift, deadlift from the floor, trains your erectors in a static position because you have to hold your low back, but it doesn't really train the erectors through a range of motion like you would with other exercises. And so I've just been adding that at the end of my leg days, doing on a 45-degree back extension, weighted, and keeping the pad higher up on my hips so that my spine is the part flexing and not necessarily my glutes. A lot of people use a 45-degree back extension for their glutes and hamstrings, but if you put the pad higher, it's more erectors. And so that's something I'm adding. And so for that exercise, because I've never really trained it directly before, or at least not a lot, I'm able to do it with a very light weight and not even get that close to failure. And my back is pumped, sore, disrupted, and I started with one set and then I gradually added a second set. And I still haven't needed to take that exercise even to failure to feel a really, really good stimulus. And similarly, like I a lot of times I just don't train abs. And so for the last month, I've been trying to intentionally train my abs. So I started doing sets of 10 where I could probably do 20 reps. But that's enough where my abs are really sore. And if I tried to go close to failure on all those sets, I would get really bad ab cramps and I probably would just stop training them. So that's kind of giving you a flavor of how I think about intensity. But to answer your original question, one of the intensity techniques I really like, especially on isolation movements, like a hamstring curl, is I'll do the first set. So let's say I'm doing a set and I get 15 reps, and that's really close to failure. That's the most I could do on the first set. The next set, naturally, if you're training hard, your reps should fall off from set to set. On the next set, I'll try to match that number, but with taking rest pauses to get there. So maybe on the next set, I would naturally get 12 reps. So I'll get the 12 and then I'll pause for 5 deep breaths, and then I'll do the 3 more reps. And then on the last set, maybe I'll only get to 10 or 9. And so then I'll pause, I'll get 3 more reps, and then I'll be at 12, and then I'll pause again, and then I'll get 3 more reps. So each set is getting to that first set's rep number, but through pauses. And that's a really good way to, get more reps that are close to failure and kind of that effective volume. And I find it works really, really well for isolation movements. For delts, it works really well. You do your first set of, cable lateral raises or something, and you might get 20 reps, and then you match that each time. You're getting all these mini sets along the way. And so that's probably my favorite intensity technique.
Yeah, it's a good methodology to follow. I think for me and people I speak to, at least, it seems to have the most applicable uses. You brought up a great point as well about the 45-degree hyperextension bench. So I actually do that twice a week. But I train different muscle groups on the same piece of equipment. So like you said, you bring the bench up as close towards your hips, your midsection, and you focus more on your lower back. The same way, if you bring it lower, it'll focus more on your glutes and hamstrings. So I actually incorporate that for each week.
And me as well. I do both.
Yeah, it's a bit of a girl's exercise, but how many men out there have poor lower backs?
Yeah. Yeah. I've tried a million different ways of trying to do Romanian deadlifts for my hamstrings and my posterior chain, if you want to call it that. And I always just find it's such a fatiguing exercise. Even getting the barbell off the bar to start the lift, it's just adding so much fatigue. And so, yeah, that's a great example of like trying to get more out of less. Is if you can hop on the 45-degree back extension and do it correctly and do it slow, you can get a similar stimulus without all that extra fatigue.
Yeah, that's another good point. I mean, most exercise physiologists I know, when I talk to them about building muscle, they say, you know, um, spinal loading in the format of doing a deadlift. It's You're not going to get much out of it for the amount of effort that you have to put into doing it.
Yeah,
So you're better off just
exactly.
almost isolating the individual muscle groups around that to get more
Yeah.
benefit. Yeah. So before we wrap this up, how can people find you, Scott, and tell us about your lovely YouTube channel?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on all podcasting platforms. If you just look up Carnivore Cast, you can't miss it. I'm also on Instagram and YouTube. So find me there. Just search Carnivore Cast. I'm now doing video interviews like this one. Previously, I was just doing audio, but people really seem to love the video format. So I'm doing that. And yeah, I put out one episode a week. Usually it's either a case study in someone who's alleviated a chronic condition such as major depression or arthritis, or binge eating or something else using a keto or carnivore diet, or it's an expert who specializes in either research or clinical practice of helping people alleviate different conditions. And yeah, just find me there, and really love engaging with people too. So if you have any questions, shoot me a DM. I always respond, or shoot me an email. And yeah, really, really love hearing from folks.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to speak with you today, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you, Jonathan.